Ladies and gentlemen, there is a silence more powerful than speech, a presence more vivid in absence, and in this stillness something begins to stir. So, in the quiet spaces where we think nothing is happening, everything is happening. Avoidant behavior often confuses those on the receiving end. It can feel cold, detached, or even cruel. One might wonder, how can someone who once seemed so connected suddenly become distant, unresponsive, or emotionally shut down? But such behavior is rarely rooted in malice. It is more often than not a coping mechanism, a learned pattern of emotional self-protection born from experiences where closeness was unsafe, overwhelming, or inconsistent. Avoidant individuals have often internalized a belief, perhaps subconsciously, that vulnerability leads to pain. This belief is not formed overnight. It is etched slowly into the psyche, often in early childhood, where emotional expression may have been met with rejection, ridicule, or neglect. In such an environment, the child learns to survive by turning inward, by withdrawing from the emotional world around them and seeking safety and autonomy. Their nervous system adapts to perceive closeness as a threat, not a comfort. And so, what might appear as aloofness or emotional coldness in adulthood is, in fact, a sophisticated defense, an internal alarm system honed over time. When emotional intimacy is offered, it may initially be welcomed, even desired, but the deeper the connection grows, the more threatening it feels to the avoidant's inner world. Their conditioned response is to create space, to withdraw, not because they do not care, but because caring deeply feels dangerous. This withdrawal is not necessarily a conscious decision. The avoidant person may not even understand why they feel the need to pull away. Their mind might offer rational explanations, I just need space, or I'm not ready for this, but beneath the surface, it is an emotional reflex. Their body remembers what their mind has long buried, that closeness brings pain and distance brings safety. However, emotional withdrawal comes at a cost. While it may temporarily alleviate the avoidant's internal discomfort, it often leaves the other person feeling abandoned, confused, or rejected. The cycle is painful for both parties. The avoidant retreats to self-soothe, while the other is left to wonder if they did something wrong. The relationship becomes marked by a painful rhythm, approach and retreat, connection and disconnection. What is essential to understand here is that avoidance is not the absence of feeling. It is the suppression of it. The avoidant feels, often deeply, but does not know how to process or express those feelings. Instead of allowing themselves to sit with emotional discomfort, they attempt to bypass it through disengagement. The very intimacy they crave is the very thing they fear, and so they remain caught in an internal tug-of-war. The mechanism of emotional withdrawal is also reinforced by cultural narratives that prize independence over vulnerability. We are taught that needing others is weakness, that self-sufficiency is virtue. For the avoidant individual, this external message aligns perfectly with their internal coping style. They mistake isolation for strength. They confuse emotional suppression with stability, but true resilience lies not in avoiding feeling, but in meeting it with presence and courage. When someone with an avoidant attachment style begins to form a close connection, their internal system is activated. Emotional closeness triggers old fears, stirring memories that lie beneath conscious awareness. These reactions can be swift and overwhelming. They may begin to rationalize their disconnection, convincing themselves that the other person is too demanding, too emotional, or too intense. But more often than not, it is not the other person that is the problem. It is the unresolved emotional material rising to the surface. The tragedy here is that in seeking safety through withdrawal, the avoidant individual often recreates the very loneliness they fear most. They push others away to protect themselves, but in doing so, they reinforce their belief that intimacy is unsafe or fleeting. Each withdrawal becomes another brick in the wall between themselves and others, and over time, this wall can grow so thick that even they forget what lies on the other side. And yet, within this coping mechanism is also an opportunity for healing. If the avoidant person can begin to recognize their withdrawal not as a sign of who they are, but as a pattern of protection, then space is created for change. The act of stepping back emotionally does not have to be permanent. It can become a moment of reflection rather than rejection. But this requires a new relationship to discomfort, a willingness to feel what was once unfelt, to explore the sensations they have long fled from. For those in relationship with someone who is avoidant, understanding this mechanism can bring a measure of peace. It does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does illuminate it. Their withdrawal is not necessarily a reflection of your worth or your actions. It is a reflection of their pain and the internal mechanisms they have adopted to survive. You did not cause their wounds, and you cannot fix them, but you can choose how you respond, with compassion, with boundaries, and with clarity. Avoidance does not heal through confrontation or persuasion. It heals through presence, sometimes your own, sometimes the absence that creates space for self-awareness. When the avoidant is no longer able to rely on withdrawal as a strategy, when they begin to see that distance does not bring the peace they imagined, they may become curious, and in that curiosity, the door to transformation begins to open. To heal from emotional withdrawal is not to stop needing space. Space can be sacred, but it is to begin relating to that space differently, not as an escape, but as a pause, not as a means of separation, but as an invitation to listen inwardly. What is truly being avoided? What story is being repeated? And what does it mean to remain present, even in the face of fear? The avoidant person is not broken. They are simply using an outdated map to navigate a new landscape. And as with all maps, it can be redrawn. With patience, with awareness, and with willingness, the avoidance can soften, giving way to a more grounded form of connection, one that does not shrink from vulnerability, but embraces it as the gateway to depth. In the end, emotional withdrawal is a coping mechanism, intelligent, adaptive, and often unconscious. But like all mechanisms of survival, it is limited. It keeps one safe, yes, but also small. And the journey of healing is the slow, conscious unfolding out of these tight spaces, toward the vastness of emotional truth, toward the aliveness that intimacy offers, and toward a life not shaped by fear, but by presence. Absence is not empty. It carries a presence of its own, a silent force that reflects what lies beneath the surface of our conditioned minds. For the avoidant individual, your absence is not merely a missing figure in their outer world. It becomes a mirror, silently and powerfully revealing the parts of themselves they have worked so hard to escape. When someone has developed an avoidant pattern of attachment, they relate to intimacy as a kind of danger. They do not necessarily do this consciously. But closeness can feel engulfing, suffocating not because of what the other person is doing, but because of what the avoidant mind has come to associate with vulnerability. Emotional exposure feels threatening. To protect themselves, they build emotional distance. They create internal mechanisms designed to minimize connection when it begins to feel too intense. However, when you, the emotionally present one, step back either to protect your own well-being or simply out of necessity, a strange phenomenon unfolds. In your absence, the avoidant is no longer reacting to your presence. There are no conversations to retreat from, no emotions to manage, no closeness to deflect. What remains is a vast, unoccupied space, and within that space, something unexpected occurs. The avoidant is left alone with themselves. And for someone who has built their inner world around the avoidance of emotional intimacy, not only with others, but also with themselves, this moment is profoundly unsettling. In the beginning, they may feel a sense of relief. Finally, they might think the pressure is off, no more conversations that demand vulnerability, no more closeness they don't know how to navigate, no more perceived threat of being seen too deeply. But as the stillness lingers, something more begins to surface. Your absence begins to function like a mirror, not a mirror of memory, but a mirror of presence, a paradox. Though you are gone, the energetic imprint of the connection remains. And that imprint begins to reflect aspects of their inner world that have been dormant or buried, feelings of longing, grief, abandonment, regret. All the emotions that their avoidance was designed to protect against begin to rise, not because you imposed them, but because the space you left behind has become an open field where their own truth can no longer be ignored. Avoidant individuals are often skilled at compartmentalizing. They separate emotional experience from cognitive awareness. They may think they are fine because on the surface they are functioning. But underneath, emotional energy accumulates. The body holds what the mind denies, and in the space of your absence, the compartments begin to loosen. The distractions they once relied on busyness, logic, emotional numbing no longer fill the void. What makes absence such a powerful mirror is that it strips away stimulus. There is no new content to react to, no messages to interpret, no words to decode. There is only what remains inside them, and for the avoidant individual, that often includes a quiet ache they don't yet have language for. Your absence doesn't cause that ache, it reveals it. It reveals the loneliness they have carried even when surrounded by others. It reflects their disconnection not just from you, but from their own inner life. This is why your presence was so disruptive to them, not because it was wrong, but because it illuminated something within them that felt overwhelming. And now, in your absence, the very thing they avoided becomes inescapable. They may not immediately recognize what is happening. The avoidant mind, when faced with emotional discomfort, often defaults to rationalizations. They may convince themselves that the relationship wasn't right or that they were better off alone. They may even feel indignant or emotionally numb. But over time, those defenses begin to wear thin. The emotional body does not forget. The longing returns not always for you specifically, but for what you represented: safety, warmth, emotional attunement. Qualities they secretly yearned for, even while pushing them away. In this way, your absence becomes a teacher, not through effort, but through emptiness. It gently forces the avoidant to sit with the truth that they have always tried to outrun, the truth that they are not as self-sufficient as they believed, that the isolation they chose for protection has also become a prison, and they are the only one who holds the key. This is not to romanticize absence, nor to suggest that distance is a guaranteed catalyst for growth. Many avoidant individuals will attempt to fill the silence with distraction or move quickly to another connection where the emotional stakes feel lower. But if they are even slightly aware, if the absence touches a part of them that remembers what it was like to feel emotionally held, then something begins to shift. A sense of emptiness emerges, not just from missing you, but from confronting the deeper emotional vacuum within. They may try to repress it, to analyze it, to explain it away. But if the absence is long enough, still enough, and if they are open enough, they may begin to see it for what it is: a reflection of their own abandoned inner world. Absence is often feared because it removes the illusion of control. But in that removal, space is created, not just external space, but internal clarity. The avoidant may, for the first time, begin to recognize the dissonance between their emotional world and the persona they have constructed. They may notice that the peace they thought they had by distancing themselves from emotional intimacy was not peace at all, but a fragile form of emotional suppression. And this realization, though painful, is also liberating. To see oneself clearly, even if only for a moment, is the beginning of transformation. Your absence, then, does not become an act of punishment, but an invitation, a nonverbal message that says, "I will not abandon myself to hold space for your avoidance." In doing so, you become the mirror they have long avoided, but perhaps now are finally ready to see. It must be said, though, that the mirror of absence is not always received with grace. The avoidant may lash out, withdraw further, or spiral into self-justification. That too is part of the process. Growth does not always look like awakening. Sometimes it looks like resistance, denial, or regression. But even then, something has been stirred. The image in the mirror cannot be unseen, even if they turn away from it. Whether or not they choose to look deeper is not something you can control. Your absence is not a tool to force growth. It is a natural boundary, an act of self-respect that simply leaves space in which the avoidant can finally meet themselves if they are willing. And if they are not, that too is their journey. The role of the mirror is not to persuade the one who looks into it, but simply to reflect what is already there. And so, absence becomes more than an end. It becomes a revelation of what was present all along, hidden beneath the armor of avoidance, waiting quietly to be seen. There is a peculiar paradox that unfolds when you step out of someone's life, especially when that someone is avoidant. On the surface, it may seem as if your presence has been erased, as if your voice no longer echoes, your warmth no longer lingers. But in truth, presence is not tied solely to physical form. Presence leaves an imprint. And even in absence, that imprint remains. For the avoidant, who is conditioned to keep intimacy at arm's length, your physical presence often brings discomfort. It challenges the barriers they have constructed. Your openness stirs up the feelings they have spent years avoiding. So when you are gone, there may be an initial relief, a perceived return to equilibrium, but that relief is often fleeting, because true presence is not so easily undone. Your presence has already made contact with something within them. It may have been brief, it may have been subtle, but when you showed up fully, when you offered your attention without demand, when you saw them without needing to fix them, a seed was planted. One they may not have even noticed, one they may have tried to deny, but it took root nonetheless. This is what we call presence beyond presence. It is the energetic continuation of being that remains even after you have walked away. It is not about memory in the traditional sense. It is not the recollection of moments or the nostalgia of shared time. It is far more subtle than that. It is an internal echo of connection, something that lives on in the emotional body long after the external interaction has ended. Avoidant individuals are often unaware of how deeply they are affected by the presence of someone who meets them with emotional depth. They may shrug it off. They may tell themselves and others that the connection didn't matter, that it was just another fleeting moment in time. But deep down in the quiet spaces they rarely inhabit, something lingers. When you leave, the avoidant does not only lose your company, they lose the contrast, the reflection, the mirror that you unknowingly held up to them, showing them what it felt like to be truly seen. In your presence, they may have felt exposed but also safe, overwhelmed but also real. This complexity is difficult for them to articulate and even more difficult to feel, so they push it away, they push you away. Not because you are too much, but because the feeling itself is too unfamiliar. And yet, in the stillness of your absence, your energetic signature remains. You may find this hard to believe, especially if the avoidance seems unaffected. If they move on quickly, if they appear composed, indifferent, even cold, but avoidance is not the absence of emotion, it is the suppression of it, and when something has touched the inner world, no matter how buried it becomes, it cannot be undone. It simply waits, and it is in the silence left behind by your withdrawal that the impression of your presence becomes undeniable. They may feel it as a restlessness, an unease they cannot name. They may notice that something about their world feels less alive, though they cannot place why. The conversations they once dismissed now echo faintly in their mind. The warmth of your gaze, the steadiness of your presence, the space you held without intrusion, all these qualities resurface not as memories, but as felt impressions, energetic residues that linger in their nervous system. Presence beyond presence is not about clinging to the past. It is not about wishing for return. It is the reality that connection, when sincere, does not vanish simply because proximity ends. When we meet someone deeply, we meet them beyond form, and in doing so, we leave behind a subtle invitation and opening that remains, whether they choose to step into it or not. For the avoidant, this invitation becomes a silent disturbance. They are not used to being affected. They have trained themselves to stay emotionally separate. But your presence may have pierced that armor, even briefly, and now, in your absence, they are left to contend with what was awakened not by force, not by confrontation, but by the quiet power of authentic connection. This is what makes presence beyond presence so potent. It does not demand, it does not chase, it simply is, and that is why it haunts the avoidant in ways they cannot fully comprehend. It is not your words that return to them, it is the stillness beneath them. It is not your actions, it is the intention behind them. It is not your form, it is your formlessness, your beingness, the grounded essence you carried without asking anything in return. You may have walked away. You may have chosen peace over confusion, clarity over chaos, but your presence left a mark, not a scar, but an impression, one that slowly reveals to the avoidant what they did not know they were missing. Not you specifically, perhaps, but what you represented. Connection that was not controlling, love that did not suffocate, intimacy that did not demand. And in this absence, something begins to shift. Not always quickly, not always dramatically, but slowly, silently, like water wearing away stone. The realization may come as a whisper, a thought they cannot shake, a feeling they cannot name. They may find themselves comparing others to you, not because they idealize you, but because something about the depth you brought cannot be replicated by superficial connection. They may begin to feel a quiet longing, not for a person, but for presence itself, for the safety and spaciousness they once felt but could not hold. This longing, if allowed, becomes the gateway. It invites reflection. It softens rigidity. It stirs the soul awake, of course. Not all avoidant individuals will rise to meet this inner invitation. Some will double down on avoidance. Some will numb the ache. Some will seek distraction after distraction, hoping to outrun the shadow of their own unopened heart. But even then, your presence remains not to torment, but to remind. Remind them that they were once seen, that they were once capable of connection, that there is more to life than emotional survival. The lesson for you, the one who stepped back, is this. You do not need to force your value to be recognized. You do not need to shout your worth into ears that are not ready to hear. You were present. You showed up. You offered yourself in truth. That is enough. And even if it seems to go unnoticed, know that presence, true presence, always lands, even in hearts that are not yet ready to receive it. In stepping away, you have not vanished. You have expanded. You have become the silence that speaks louder than words, the space that clarifies what noise obscured. You are not chasing, not clinging, not waiting. You are simply being, and in that being, your presence continues to ripple. There is power in knowing that presence is not defined by physical nearness. There is peace in understanding that you do not need to stay in someone's life to remain in their awareness. Sometimes the most transformative presence is the one that lingers after you've gone, the one that stirs questions, awakens feelings, and breaks open the shell of avoidance from the inside out. And if they ever awaken to it, if they ever choose to turn inward and face what was once too much to feel, they will not find you there in form, but they will find what you represented, the possibility of depth, the memory of connection, the echo of love without possession. That is presence beyond presence, and that is a gift they will carry, whether they acknowledge it or not. Growth is often imagined as an upward movement, a striving, an effort, a climb toward clarity or enlightenment. But some of the most profound growth does not occur in movement at all. It takes root in stillness, in absence, in silence. For the avoidant individual, this stillness does not always arrive by choice. It arrives through a void, the space you leave behind when you walk away. At first, that space may feel like freedom to them. The pressure is gone. There is no longer a person gently nudging them toward openness, no longer a mirror reflecting their emotional defenses. They may interpret this as relief, but as time stretches on, the very void they once welcomed begins to shift. It does not stay empty, it begins to whisper. The void is not merely a gap where something used to be. It is a presence in and of itself, a presence that has the power to reveal, to challenge, and to transform. The avoidant has often structured their life around the avoidance of discomfort, specifically the discomfort of emotional intimacy and vulnerability. Your presence likely activated those discomforts, but now, in your absence, the void begins to do the same in a quieter, more persistent way. Without you, the external stimulus disappears, but in that silence, the inner voices grow louder. There is no longer a distraction from the parts of themselves they have tried to silence, the ache of disconnection, the longing for closeness, the grief they never processed, the guilt they never named. These feelings do not emerge all at once. They rise slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, but they rise. The avoidant person often associates emotional exposure with danger not because of you, but because of formative experiences that taught them that closeness could lead to pain. Maybe it was inconsistent parenting, emotional neglect, or a lack of safe spaces in childhood. Whatever the origin, they learned to survive by retreating inward. Your presence may have felt like a threat to that survival strategy. But now the void left in your absence begins to create another kind of tension, the slow, gnawing realization that their strategy no longer serves them. They may try to fill the void with busyness, work, new relationships, logic, entertainment, even spirituality, but none of these things can fully mask what is beginning to stir beneath the surface. Because the void has a wisdom of its own, it does not force. It reveals, it asks a question, not with words, but with feeling. Is this all there is? And eventually, the avoidant begins to answer, even if only within themselves. Growth in the void is not dramatic. It rarely announces itself. It happens in the quietest moments in the middle of the night when distractions wear thin, in the middle of a conversation that suddenly feels empty, in the pause after laughter that does not touch the soul. It happens when they catch themselves thinking of you, not out of longing or regret, but out of a deepening awareness that something in your presence pointed them back to a part of themselves they abandoned long ago. This growth is not linear. There are setbacks, resistance, denial. They may lash out at themselves or project onto others. They may repress what arises, but growth has already begun the moment they begin to feel not just emotionally, but somatically. The body begins to recognize what the mind has ignored, tension builds, the armor cracks, emotions once buried begin to find their way to the surface. What they do with this rising awareness varies. Some may numb it. Some may seek temporary comfort. Some may intellectualize their way around it. But others, perhaps for the first time, will begin to sit with it, to observe it, to name it, and in doing so, they begin to reclaim the parts of themselves that fear pushed into hiding. The void has no agenda. It does not ask them to become someone else. It simply reflects what is already within. That is its power. It mirrors their internal landscape in stark clarity. There are no distractions in the void. No one to blame, no one to fix. There is only themselves, and this realization, though uncomfortable, is also the seed of change. You see, avoidance is not a fixed identity. It is a pattern, a coping mechanism. And all patterns can be observed, understood, and gently undone. But this undoing rarely happens in the presence of pressure. It happens in space, in stillness, in the void. When the avoidant realizes that no one is coming to rescue them from themselves, they may finally begin to turn inward, not out of despair, but out of quiet readiness. They begin to ask different questions. What am I avoiding? Why does closeness feel dangerous? What part of me feels unworthy of being seen? These are not easy questions. They require courage, but courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the simple willingness to feel what has long been unfelt, to sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it, to be honest not with others but with oneself, and this is where real growth begins. The avoidant may start to see that their independence was, in part, a wall, that their self-sufficiency was at times a mask, that their emotional detachment was less about strength and more about fear. These realizations do not diminish them, they humanize them, they soften them. And as softness returns, so too does the possibility of connection not necessarily with you, but with themselves, with others, with life itself. Growth in the void is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole, integrating the rejected parts, welcoming the tender places, allowing the heart to open even slightly in a world that once demanded it be closed. It is about the avoidant beginning to understand that vulnerability is not weakness, it is the birthplace of authentic connection. This growth is often invisible to the outside world. The avoidant may not reach out, they may not explain, but something inside them begins to shift. A quiet recognition takes hold that your absence did not destroy them, but revealed to them where they had already gone missing. That the space you left was not just a loss, it was a mirror, a teacher, a portal. It must be said that not all avoidants will embrace this process. Some may remain wedded to their patterns. Some may continue to run. But even then, your absence has planted a seed, one that may bloom years later in a different context, with a different person, but its roots were laid in the soil of the void you left behind. And for those who do allow the growth, who choose to turn inward rather than away, the transformation can be profound. They begin to reclaim their emotional world. They learn to sit with discomfort. They learn to stay, to feel, to trust, and though they may never say it, they carry a quiet gratitude for the one who once held space for them, and for the space that taught them to hold themselves. Your role in their journey is not to be the hero nor the villain. It is simply to be what you were: present, real, human, and in stepping away, you allowed the next teacher to arrive, the void. A teacher that demands nothing, offers nothing, but reflects everything. A teacher that speaks not in words, but in space. A teacher that invites transformation, not through pressure, but through stillness. This is the paradox. In the emptiness, something awakens. In the void, something grows. Not despite your absence, but because of it. Not in the light, but in the dark. Slowly, quietly, honestly. This is growth in the void. So, ladies and gentlemen, what appears on the surface as detachment, silence, or indifference from the avoidant is often a mask, a shield forged in early experience, shaped by fear, and maintained by the illusion that distance equals safety. Yet beneath that mask lies a deeper truth. Even those who seem most untouched by connection are, in fact, shaped by it. Your presence, conscious, grounded, unintrusive, has already done its quiet work. And your absence, rather than erasing what was, illuminates what remains unresolved within them. There is no need to chase what resists, nor mourn what could not hold you. In stepping back, in choosing peace over pursuit, you created space, and that space became a mirror. A mirror that reflects back not just to them, but also to you, all that has been felt, all that was true, and all that is still becoming. Let us remember, true connection does not cling, and growth does not always look like closeness. Sometimes the most profound transformation occurs not in togetherness, but in the silent unfolding that begins when one soul steps away and another is left to finally meet themselves. In the haunting absence, in the stillness left behind, in the echo of what once was, there is awakening. There is presence, there is growth, there is truth, and in that nothing has been lost, only revealed.